Namaste, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the For the Culture podcast. I'm your host, Vedant Ganesh, and today's topic of conversation is the Ram Janmabhoomi Mandir, which translates to the Temple of Lord Rama at his birthplace in Ayodhya, India. Now, for those of us who aren't terribly familiar with today's topic of conversation, not to worry. We dive into an introduction very early on, but I would like to provide you with some context here. The reconstruction of this mandir, or temple, is one of the greatest events in terms of indigenous reclamation and decolonization. The original Ram Mandir was one of Hinduism's holiest sites and was savagely destroyed by the Mughal Emperor Babur in the year 1528, which is 496 years ago. The Emperor Babur was hell-bent on claiming victory over the indigenous Hindu population by not only massacring their people, but by destroying various holy Hindu sites. Hindu kings and queens throughout the pages of history have tried to rebuild these temples. These leaders include Shivaji Maharaj and Ahalyabai Holkar, who spent their lives protecting and defending the Hindu population and trying to reclaim the holy Hindu sites that were savagely conquered. Yet this Ram Mandir, one of the holiest sites in Hinduism, remained lost to the clutches of the barbaric colonization of Islamic forces. Now, in 2024, that's all about to change. Joining me in discussing this change are today's guests, Amit G. Misra and Rakhi G. Israni. Amit G was born in St. Louis, Missouri, but was raised in Houston, Texas. He got his Bachelor of Arts in George Washington University and a law degree from UT Austin. He currently has three children. Rakhi G. Israni grew up in Houston, Texas, and actually has known Amit G since her childhood. She currently resides in the Bay Area, California, where she is the president of Excel Test Prep, a nationwide education company. She's also the board member of the State Bar of Texas. She has four children. Both Amitji and Rakiji were born in the States, they were raised in the States, and have spent their entire adult lives in the United States, but they've been active in the Hindu American space since their childhoods, and now that they're adults, they've only gotten more involved. Their involvement can be seen in various organizations such as the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, Hindu Swayamsevak Sangh, and many more. Rakiji, for example, is the vice president of the public relations at Seva International, which is the largest Hindu American service organization in the United States. She is also a board member of the Om School and the Vivekananda University. Amitji serves on the board of the directors of the Om Education Society of America and is also on the board of Seva International. He also serves as legal counsel to the Hindu Swayamsevak Sangh in USA, Ekal Vidyalaya Foundation, and Seva International USA. So it's rather evident that both of our guests today know what they're talking about and have been very active in the Hindu community since their childhood. Our conversation, as you'll find, is informative, elucidative, and very, very interesting. I hope you do gain something from this conversation. I'd like to hear your thoughts at the end, so please leave a comment, like, share this video with anyone you think would be interested or could benefit from this, and just let me know what you think. So with that being said, let's dive right into the conversation. Namaste, Rakiji, Amitji. How are you guys doing?
All right.
Doing well.
Glad to hear. So, as we all know, today's topic is the Ram Janmabhoomi Mandir, which is sort of like a hot topic in the news right now because of the consecration that is going to happen in 9 days. So, for our viewers out there who might not necessarily know all about the Mandir or its significance, would the two of you mind explaining exactly what this is all about and why it matters?
Rocky can go first.
Okay, I will go first. So yes, this is something that holds a lot of significance for Hindus and for any Indian that has a spiritual connection to India, I would say. This is something that's been going on for hundreds of years. It started with the destruction of a mandir at the place of Ram's birth by the Mughal invaders, by Babri or one of his generals. And since then, there's been an ongoing battle for this site because, while 30,000 temples were destroyed all across India during that period, there are a few that hold special significance, and this is one of them. This is, we believe, is the birthplace, the actual birthplace of Lord Ram. And so it was with a lot of joy that the Supreme Court in 2019 finally said that, yes, this does belong to Lord Ram. This is the birthplace of Lord Ram, and they gave the permission for a temple to finally be built. So January 22nd is kind of a reawakening. I think it's a very powerful day for Hindus. It's a very emotional day for Hindus. And no matter what the language or national boundaries or whatever it is, I think that there's a lot of excitement across the world that this is finally happening.
Very cool. Amici, anything to add on?
I think it's important when you're looking at Hindu history and the perspective we should have when it comes to events of this sort. You know, we underwent two separate colonizations in India as Hindu people. The first was under Turkic peoples, different waves of Turkic peoples who came into India at different times and were able to take over political authority of different parts of the country in different eras. And we had, of course, the Europeans come, and they also held sway over different parts of the country in different eras. And there's a lot of literature out there about decolonization and decoloniality. And in today's environment, because of the political forces that kind of control the narrative, we're free to discuss decolonization when it comes to European powers, but we're not free to talk about decolonization when it comes to these earlier waves of Turkic and Perso-Turkic invaders who came into different parts of India at different times. And it's important to keep that perspective because this really is an extensive decolonization process. It's as legitimate as any other decolonization process. So if we're going to take down statues of Stalin and Lenin in 1989 in Eastern Europe, and we're going to take down statues of Confederate generals apparently in 2020, 2021 here in the US, then there are also other symbols of oppression that are as worthy of being taken down and being replaced with appropriate symbols of the people who now live there and have their rights heard. And I think it's important to understand that Hindu peoples have not had that opportunity. There are various political and other structures that kind of deprive Hindus of voice, of agency, and trap us into our history instead of giving us the opportunity in 2024 to do what we want to do. And this is an organic movement to rebuild a mandir at Ram Janmabhoomi. And it's literally not just tens, but hundreds of millions of Hindus who have contributed, big and small, toward this effort. And it's an organic, genuine effort of Hindu people to retake their holy site. And again, it's as legitimate as any other decolonization effort.
I really like that you touched up on how some forms of decolonization are acceptable in today's sort of political sphere, and other sorts of decolonizations are not as acceptable. So before I sort of touch on that vein, would it be fair to say that, of the estimated 2 million plus Hindu temples all around the world, this mandir specifically holds a special significance due to the history and due to the location? If anything, I could sort of compare it to like the second Temple of Solomon, where it was sort of being reconstructed after being knocked down by invaders, holding a very sort of significant uh meaning to the people that worship there. Would that be a fair comparison, do you think?
It is an apples to apples comparison only because within the Jewish tradition, they do associate a particular sacredness to place because of Abraham's covenant with Yahweh and Israel being gifted to Abraham, as their stories tell them. The place itself is very significant for them. Largely in the Christian and Muslim tradition, especially as it's practiced today, place is no longer significant beyond two locations. Obviously, for Muslims, Mecca and Medina are significant to them. For Catholics, the Vatican still has significance for them. But the practice of pilgrimage and whatnot in modern Christianity simply is not there It's not a widespread thing that they do anymore. That custom's been lost for them. And generally speaking, masjids that are built anywhere else in the world to provide a place of worship for Muslims, the location itself is a matter of convenience and availability versus having some religious significance. For Hindus, and largely for all kind of pre-Christian Muslim peoples that still live in the world today, geographic place has a sanctity, a sacredness associated with stories of the people of that place. In our tradition, rivers, mountains, other locations, we call them tirthastan, place of pilgrimage, and they hold special significance. And that doesn't seem to happen, and it doesn't resonate with, like, modern people don't appreciate that. So there is a history of Ram Janmabhoomi in Ayodhya being a place of tirtha, being a place of pilgrimage, and a mandir being there. And we have the same tradition going on in Mathura with the Krishna Janmasthan. And there's frankly an issue of dispute there as well, where there's currently a masjid at the actual site where the Krishna Janmasthan Mandir used to be. And so we see, frankly, two phenomena. One is that we hold a special significance for geographic space. And we also know, part of the colonization process, in order to assert their authority, their domination, and to remind us of our subservience, mosques were built on these sites to remind us that we lost and they won. And that's why this is a continuing issue for us, because those sites are sacred. And the reason that they're not in our control at the moment is because there was this past political defeat. But in today's environment, where Hindus want to assert their rights, and whether it's legal process, political process, or otherwise, this is what's generated these movements to take back these spaces.
Very interesting. Okay, thank you. Rakhi, anything to add on to that?
No, I think that was so nicely said. I guess the only thing I would say though is that, that as Amit mentioned, that, it wasn't even that the temple was fully broken. It was like the remnants were still left as a constant reminder of what we can do to you, right? That you are subjected to our power, that you're weak or whatever. And that's always been a constant reminder. But then we're also then reminded of the fact through our own scriptures that this is a place of holiness, right? So it's kind of like, I think there's a story in the Mahabharata about Bhishma Pitama takes Amba and Ambalika, right? It's for his stepbrother's wedding. And I think it's Amba who holds this vengeance that, because she's taken away from her lover, and he lets her go back, but the lover rejects her. And she carries that injustice with her through the next generation, right? And so it's very similar in our ways, that there was an injustice done, and there was an injustice. It was this idea that there's an emotional injustice. It was done to really hit at our psyche, and that has not left us generations after generations. And so, and you look at like what that history is. I mean, the Hindus actually tried to do it in the legal way, right? They filed a petition in court, and they looked to have the system kind of help them correct this injustice. And so it's kind of a vindication in that sense that it's finally happening, and that it was done in a proper manner. Yeah, it's amazing, and it's exciting that this is happening now in our generation.
Right. Nicely put, both of you. I feel like that was a very sort of eloquent explanation of a more complex topic. So this is a decolonization process, very important site for Hindus. It seems like everyone should be very happy about this, but as we know, that is not the case. This is sort of a topic that is very controversial, even within India. Major political parties such as Congress are boycotting the inauguration of this temple. Um, People are citing this construction effort and decolonization effort as Islamophobic, and there's a lot of controversy about that. So, uh, sort of going off of what Amitji mentioned, a lot of these sort of mandirs, when they were destroyed, mosques were built on those sites as a sort of rubbing salt in the wounds of the the indigenous population of India. Um, Now, the modern day India looks a lot different than what India thousands of years ago did, in the sense that now we have multiple religions within the country. So, what do you have to say about claims that, affecting the mosque that was on the site, or supporting this reconstruction effort is Islamophobic, in any sort of way?
So I think that you can throw labels around if you want for political purposes, and obviously political parties see their gain in taking a certain agenda forward, and will use that type of language. I think that the reality is that there was Islamist supremacism. Took me a while to get that out. Islamist supremacism was the source of these issues to begin with, right? The Ram Janmabhoomi Mandir being replaced with a masjid is an act of Islamist supremacism. And when the power was ascendant in the hands of, at that time, let's say the Mughals, they exercised that power in that act of supremacy. And I can be equally harsh, I think, in the opposite direction, that Hindus in India, in the current framework there, have the political power to build the Ram Janmabhoomi Mandir. And is that an act of Islamophobia? I think if we're going to take every effort of decolonization and try to frame it as the oppressed now being somehow a supremacist, are African Americans supremacists if they tear down a Confederate general statue? Very simple question. The answer is no. It's not an act of supremacy. It's an act of justice, as Rakhi ji was saying. And so it depends on your point of view. And if you want to take this point of view, that this is somehow an act of Hindu supremacy and it's also an act of Islamophobia, frankly, that's the language that was used in 1947 to partition India to begin with. This boogeyman of Hindu supremacy, which there's no historical evidence for it at all, of even once Islam entered India and you had Muslim communities formed in India, where's there the example of Hindu supremacy against those Muslim communities? It's simply a false allegation that's made against a people who, frankly, given our civilizational framework, are more capable than any other civilization to have diversity, to have minority religious beliefs prosper. Whether we look at Zoroastrians entering India, whether we look at Jewish communities entering India at different times, frankly, even the pre-European Christian community that existed in India. All of these groups were able to exist, and not just exist, right? We're not talking about a dhimmi status where they're paying jizya every year. We're talking about they're allowed to prosper because the Hindu civilizational framework provides for that type of diversity. And there's no reason why that wouldn't be extended to Muslim communities in India as well. In fact, we see that. Post-1947, again, where's there the example of Hindu supremacist acts against Muslims? It's simply not there. It's a boogeyman. It's a false allegation that's made to achieve various political purposes, whether it was Jinnah trying to create Pakistan or going forward, these attempts to label any act of Hindus achieving justice, civilizational justice, are going to be attacked by people with their political agenda with this false allegation of Islamophobia.
Right. Very interesting.
I'll just add to that. I mean, I think that was exactly right. That, I think we're living in a day and age that unless you cater to, you're somehow anti that community, and that's
Rakhi ji,
it leads
if you
to
don't mind
even.
me cutting you off, sorry, you sort of buffered a little bit there. Would you mind restarting the sentence?
Oh yeah, no problem. So I think that we're living in a day and age that somehow it's a very polarized society, right? Either you're for someone or you're against it, and that's a very dangerous thing. We're seeing that here in the United States, right? And we're seeing that in India. That here you have something that was done to correct a wrong from the past, something that the nation needs to move forward. The psyche of the Hindu and the Indian population really needs to move forward as a nation to create more harmony, to create more unity, and somehow that's viewed as anti one particular community, rather than looking at the bigger picture. I mean, this was something that the Supreme Court, after looking at all of the evidence, the archaeological evidence, the documentations and everything like that, ruled that yes, this place holds a very special significance. They've given this 2.77 acres to Hindus. They've given 5 acres to the Muslim community, right, somewhere else. And they've done it in a way that they felt was incredibly fair. Now, how is that Islamic, right? That means then that you can never correct any wrong, because somehow the aggressor or the person or the community that maybe is affected in one way is somehow that we just need to cater to them at every point, right? And it's a very dangerous thing to that's a very dangerous path to kind of go through, because then the country as a whole and the people as a whole can never progress and prosper.
Right. So at what point then do you think, um, like at what extent does decolonization go too far, or could it go too far? Because from my research, I read that there was legislation passed that sort of said, um, you know, whatever temples and masjids are sort of made at this point in time will stay, and there's no like changing it, going back and forth. So, do you think that decolonization efforts could potentially go too far, or is there sort of no limit in an indigenous group reclaiming their land and history?
I mean, from a civilizational standpoint or a legal standpoint, right? You're kind of conflating issues here.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, decolonization as a civilizational effort, you can't put an arbitrary line, because the
Right.
process will simply carry itself forward.
Mhm.
This goes back to the idea of trapping and oppressed people in history and depriving them of agency to create their own futures going forward. And that simply doesn't work in the decolonization framework. The oppressed people, if they're ever able to regain their political power, have a full right to achieve whatever it is to eliminate those vestiges of uh, colonialism. And to put arbitrary limits on it is frankly trapping people in history. One thing to bear in mind in the context of India, uh, religious identity is not immutable, right? It's not an issue of race or gender or some other characteristic that is hardwired at birth. And the idea that we are somehow, our hands are tied because of events that happened in the past, and so going forward, we can't change things to achieve that civilizational justice. Frankly, decolonization may even include what's called Gharvapsi. And we do see uh, generally in groups, so whether it's at a village level or at a family level, groups of Christians and Muslims both in India who seek to become Hindu again. And that's an obvious part of the decolonization process. It's not as if their ancestors becoming Christian or Muslim was necessarily done in some era or atmosphere of free and open debate, and I'm simply choosing a different religious path because those words speak to me more than these words speak to me. It was all
Mhm.
done in this political environment of supremacism, whether it was Islamic supremacism during these Turkic periods, or even what we can call Christian supremacism during the European colonial periods. So none of that is closed off in the sense of decolonization. Now, obviously, within the context of Republic of India today, there is a legal framework, and as Rakhi ji has pointed out, these efforts are being done within that legal framework.
Right.
But if you have I'm no Indian constitutional lawyer, but if Parliament wants to change a bill, they can. If Parliament wants to amend the Constitution, they can. So a
Mhm.
sufficient number of voters are electing parties and representatives who hold a certain point of view. Those changes can be made. So even the bill to which you referred, the Places of Worship Act, if Parliament wants to change that, because that act is going to prevent the reconstruction of a mandir at the Krishna Janmasthan, by way of example, Parliament can change that, right? It's not like
Mhm.
it's set in stone. And the people are speaking through their elected representatives. And again, a true democracy is a majority ruling. Obviously, minority rights have to be upheld, but not under this false implication of Hindu supremacism being the result of a Hindu majority population electing its interests and electing its representatives. So I think we have to keep all that in mind. But to answer your specific question, there's no limit outside of the law. And if the law can be changed, it will be changed.
And, I'll just add to that, I mean, if we talk about like fixing decolonizations, let's keep in mind that over 30,000 Hindu temples were destroyed during that period. And Hindus are not asking for all of them. They're asking for three, right? Three special places, one of Lord Ram's birth, one for Lord Krishna, and one for Lord Shiva. And so it's not that like we're looking to undo all of the injustices that have done. We're doing what we believe is necessary for our own psyche and the psyche of the nation.
Mhm.
And whether you're a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew, if you're an Indian and you have and India holds a special significance in your heart as a spiritual land, then you should understand that.
Right. Very nicely put. Um, and I'd sort of like to go off of what you said, Rakiji, about, this decolonization effort being something to uh, undo or placate, generations of trauma passed down and down. Um, I was talking to a few Hindu friends of mine, and talking to them about this reconstruction effort, and it sort of shocked me that none of them were aware about this temple or this effort or any of this at all. And while I do, of course, know some people who sort of feel this sort of generational trauma being passed on from their parents and, are very pro Reconstruction efforts. There are just some people, Indian Hindu youth, people from India who have recently come to the United States who have no clue about this at all. Do you have any idea or any comments as to why that might be? Why some Hindus, regardless of country of origin, are completely apathetic or unknowledgeable about such a monumental religious event?
Well, I'll tell you that I think it's a bigger question actually, because I
Hmm.
think it's actually our failure as a community, to be honest, that that we don't do enough to kind of educate our own people.
Right.
But regardless of that, I think that this act of rebuilding this mandir, and in the way
Hmm.
it's being done, where the entire country is involved in the rebuilding of it, and not just the country, right? You have stones coming from Nepal and from Indonesia and from other places, right? That everyone's contributing, the languages that are being kind of put at that site to include everyone in the reconstruction. This is
Hmm.
something that whether or not people realize it today, whether or not they're paying attention to what's going on in Ayodhya today, it is something that will have huge ramifications for the community and for the country for generations to come. This is a reawakening. It's Ram, this is Lord Ram coming home, and it will be felt. Whether or not you're paying attention, it will be felt by everybody at every point going forward.
Mitchie, anything to add on to that? I
No,
felt
I
like that was
think
very well
Rakhi
said.
hit the nail on the head. It's a bigger issue of especially diaspora Hindus basically can opt into how much Hinduness, how much connection they want to have to India. And many opt out, whether they're first generation, definitely second generation. People opt out from being observant, or if they are observant, they're kind of defining their own way to observe and are basically creating let's say, a separate sect of Hindus that may be uh, definable or observable, right? I mean, the way we practice may not be exactly the same. If you make a trip to India and you go to some mandir and you see how the people are approaching the deity there and how they're doing their pujas and whatnot, and you may not feel like that's how you do it, because when you go to a mandir in the US, it's not that way, and on and on. So there are a lot of different layers to the disaffection that someone might have for the Ram Janmabhoomi movement. But the center of gravity of the global Hindu community is still in India. That's where there are 1 billion plus of us. And that is still going to define global Hinduism. It's not going to be defined by a diaspora that's, not even 1% of that. So we will always look to India to see what is happening and to define who and what we are, even as we progress as a Hindu-American community in this case. We will always be referring to India to see who and what we are.
Right, right. And it sort of reminds me of the past summer that I'd spent in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem area. Being at the site of, one of the most important religious places for the Jewish people, and right next to it was one of the holiest sites for Muslims, and right next to that was one of the holiest sites for Christians. Of course, there was a lot of religious tension in the area, but it also felt really nice to acknowledge the fact that despite conflicts of all sorts, these three groups were able to worship at the same place and do so in a relatively peaceful manner. Um, and I'd like to hope that, that is also what this area can become as well when we're referring to the Ram Janmabhoomi Mandir, because there are a lot of mosques in the area as well, uh, through the process of colonization for the most part. Do you think that this reconstruction effort will affect religious tensions or sentiments in the area, or what do you think um, this sort of decolonization has in store for the people that live within that area, or future implications for ethnic groups within that vicinity?
I think I draw again to the analogy of Confederate general statues, right?
Mm,
Who's crying for them? What daughter of the Confederacy or son of the Confederacy is crying for a Jefferson Davis statue or a Robert E. Lee statue? And even if they were to cry, what's the audience for them? And whom are they going to affect with their tears? And so at the end of the day, you can make this a controversy if you want, right? It all happened within a legal framework, as Rakhi ji has pointed out, including property being awarded to the local Waqf, the Shia Waqf board, to build a new masjid within the Ayodhya area. So the legal process has done its best to eliminate that controversy. A Hindu mandir is being rebuilt. Property has been given to the Muslim community to also build a mosque, which would be actively used, as opposed to the whole situation of the Ram Janmabhoomi, where there was actually no active Muslim worship happening at that structure
mm,
for decades before 1992. So there's really no reason for controversy unless you want to hold a grudge, right? So if you want to cry for Robert E. Lee, you want to cry for Babri Masjid, you can. But who's the audience for that? And what's the point of that? Time is moving on. The Confederacy is not coming back, and Islamic rule in India is not coming back. And find your place, as all other communities have found their place. And frankly, the vast majority of Muslims in India who are happily living their lives peacefully in a majority Hindu country, they have their rights, they have their ability to have their traditions, and interact with the rest of the population as equals. That's all happening. It's not as if this is some make-believe that we're discussing here, right? The overwhelming majority of Muslims in India live peacefully and have lived peacefully since 1947, and are living their lives and having their families and having their careers and on and on. So there's no scope for controversy unless you've got a particular political agenda, which I don't think there are any takers for it right now.
Yeah, and I think that we need to be really careful. I tell my own kids this, right? When you look at things on social media or in just traditional media, that anyone who's equating something that's pro one community or something that a community needs as anti something else, right? Those are two separate things. And in this case, this was something that the Supreme Court, when they made that decision in 2019, they knew that this is something that the Hindu community needed, right, to correct this wrong. It was not done against any other community. I mean, they tried to do it in as fair a fair manner as possible. And so anyone who has an agenda is going to try to equate the two, right? The pro something is anti something else. But I think as all of us, as responsible citizens of the world, need to recognize that disconnect, that we shouldn't allow people to do that, to equate the two in our own minds, to create problems. And that's what they're doing, the opposition that you had mentioned earlier. And I'll just mention, I watched a video by the KK Mohammed, who was the what are the archaeologists, on that was there at the site to do a lot of this research. And he made a comment that, Hinduism and the Hindu Dharma is one of the most liberal in the world, right? I mean, we're not looking to change anyone else. We're simply looking to, strengthen ourselves and our generations. And if someone takes that as an offense, or that it's somehow against someone else, then so that's their problem. That's their perspective. But we're doing this for ourselves and for our country and for our, our own psyche, basically.
Very nicely put. So sort of deviating from the topic of the mandir itself, which I think is a fantastic effort. I'm very, very excited for the 22nd to see such a sacred place be consecrated. I think it'll, be a moment going down in history. And I frankly am on the edge of my seat for it. I'd like to sort of close off with two questions addressed to the both of you, more so on a personal vein. The first being, the two of you were raised in the United States, Houston, if I'm not incorrect. And it's sort of a rare opportunity to have multiple people of your generation, meaning the generation of my parents, who were, raised in the United States. So taking this opportunity, I'd like to ask you if you have any advice for the Hindus of my generation, because there are, as Amit you mentioned, there's a certain viewpoint that seeks to stoke controversy or to paint decolonization efforts as sort of oppressive efforts. There's certain narratives that shouldn't ideally have any takers, but unfortunately do have quite a bit of takers. And I see that impacting the perception of Hinduism within Hindus of my generation raised in the States. It's frankly very disheartening. And sometimes I feel like I'm just one guy. I don't know what I can do. So I was wondering if there were any pearls of wisdom that the two of you would be willing to share for me and for the Hindus of my generation watching this, uh, who might need a bit of a wake-up call.
I definitely will let Rakhi ji take that first.
Yes, I have a lot of thoughts on this. I mean, because I have kids of my own, and I see that they come back with garbage that they hear on social media. And I'll tell you what I tell them, that if you want someone to tell you how to think and what to think, then I'd be very glad to step in and do that and tell you exactly, what your mind should be filled with. That I think that that this generation, your generation, or the younger generation, needs to step out of this TikTok generation, a TikTok livelihood or whatever. I mean, this idea that I want information right now. I just want to be told what to think, and I'm not going to use my own brain. And like something like in this situation where there's so much history, and there's a process that was followed, and this is a question of justice and righteousness and whatever. I mean, all of us are vehicles for that. And either we can choose to do what's right and to follow a good path, or we can just succumb to the masses and be told how to think, and and be a vehicle for actually destruction in the world. And I think that, if we go back to this idea of Ram Janmabhoomi, Diwali was the day that he had gone through 14 years of hardship, and he comes home, and there was a period of righteousness and goodness. And hopefully January 22nd, we see that, right? That there's a period where there's an awakening of our own community to learn the facts and to learn what's right and to do what's right in our own lives, in our thought process, in our actions, and in our words, right? We all have that responsibility to ourselves and to the world to actually understand things before we speak and before we allow any thoughts to go through our mind.
I see.
I don't really have much to add. It's a situation that unfortunately happens with most adolescents and young adults, where in our current culture here, it's a culture, frankly, that's spreading globally. There's this disaffection between the child and the parent, uh, an effort to reject perhaps what was brought into the home by influences from outside the home. And it's fueled mostly by a narcissism, by a hubris of now, and that then leads to a disregard for parents and elders and whatnot. And it's not unique to the Hindu American community. It's unfortunately, it's an endemic part of American contemporary culture. And at the end of the day, if a young adult wants to reject the parents, the grandparents, and frankly, generations of legacy in favor of some polemic about Hindu supremacism and Islamophobia, there's really not much we can do about it, because the source of that is the rejection of the parents, right? You've decided that the one course you took with the one professor, or the social media posts, as Rakhi ji is putting it, that are in your feed, are more genuine and more authoritative than anything your parents have given you. So if you've reached that point, there's really not much we can do, right? You're going to go down your path. Maybe the light bulb will go off at some later point, perhaps when you have your own children. But if you've already kind of made up your mind to be that type of person, there's really not much we can do. I think that trying to break through that hubris that my generation knows what's right and everyone else has always been wrong until now, and the whole world's been unjust until now, and this is some utopia perfection that we've achieved in 2024. It's so immature to come to that conclusion, and I don't know how to address it other than with that. You're basically being a child to reach the conclusion that you're right and everything that's happening now is correct and just, and everything that happened in the past and all the traditions that your parents and grandparents have tried to give you are somehow not worthy and should be thrown away. It's an act of immaturity. It's not an act of adulthood to do that. So
Right.
hopefully through the maturation process, there'll be a coming back to the tradition. But if you want to just buy what other people are feeding you, then, go for it. We can't really stop you.
Uh, well said, both of you. Very impactful. Uh, Personally, I sort of relate to what the two of you were saying, in the sense that I even a few days ago, I was doing an assignment for one of my classes, and the topic was something to do about the history of masculinity. And I realized that, I thought I've had this worldview where history began in 2003 when I was born, and like everything before that was just something that hadn't really happened because I wasn't around to witness it. And so it sort of hit me like a light bulb that things happened before I was here, which sounds like a rather silly thing to say, but it was definitely an awakening for me, uh, especially in a more academic sense when I realized I had a lot of things to write about in my paper. But no, I certainly hope that Hindus in my generation, especially in the diaspora, hear what you have to say, because I feel like those words are worth listening to. So this sort of brings me to my final question for the two of you. Um, what does the consecration of the Ram Janmabhoomi Mandir mean to you personally?
I think Rakhi ji and I are more or less the same age. And for me, the Ram Janmabhoomi Andolan movement, the kind of bookends of my college experience. The Shilanyas, the original groundbreaking and foundation laying ceremony, happened on November 9th, 1989, which was my first semester of college. And the Babri structure being torn down happened on December 6th, 1992, which was my first semester of graduate school. And being the student I was of international affairs at George Washington University, and there was a lot of politics that were embedded in the whole movement because of different political parties in India and what positions they were taking. And So at an academic level, I found it very interesting. And obviously at a personal level, it was, it was happening in real time, right? We witnessed it as adults. We weren't even children at that point. And in my own family, for example, my father and his older brothers visited Ayodhya in 1950 after the Ram Murti appeared in the Babri structure in December of 49. So kind of our family has always been part of it, and we were definitely very much glued to our newspapers and whatnot during that late 80s, early 90s period to see all of that. And what we've already talked about as far as this being the example of Hindus of the present day using their agency to create their future. And the future will have a mandir at the Ram Janmabhoomi site. And it's going to be, if you've seen pictures online and whatnot, I mean, it's a glorious mandir. It's not a shanty. It's not the shack where the Murti has been residing all this time. So it's a monumental day for us. And personally, it has shaped my whole young adulthood, and being middle-aged now and seeing it come to this conclusion is very gratifying, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think as Amit mentioned, in college when this happened, the 1992, the breaking, there was a lot of backlash and a lot of hatred that we had to kind of go through. But to go from there to today, where there's really an awakening in the community that this is simply just a righting of a wrong, right? This is something that the community needs, and I think for me this is it's very emotional, but it's very beautiful, the unwavering devotion to something that's so good, right? To Lord Ram. The idea that he's coming home and that everyone's so excited. It's kind of like, my brother was in college and there were three of us younger, and he'd come home and it was like, he's coming from the airport. There's so much excitement at home and, getting ready for it. And here the entire world, right? Whether you're in Houston or in the Bay Area or in Chicago or, anywhere in the country, I'm just focused on the US, but anywhere in the world, that people are waiting for this, right? That he's coming home, that there's this spirit of unity, there's a spirit of harmony, there's a spirit of goodness, right?
Mm.
That world is going to be okay, right? That, that now, we can move forward together for the upliftment of the entire society. So yeah, I think it's very emotional. It's very exciting for all of us.
I definitely feel the same way, despite not having been around as long as the two of you have to, witness this whole process from start to finish. But I'm glad I'm here to witness the end of it, which is the consecration of the mandir on the 22nd. And I hope the whole world, regardless of faith, comes to recognize this as a monumental sort of impact on not one particular community, but just on indigenous peoples everywhere, showing that decolonization on a massive scale is possible because it's happening in front of our very own eyes. So with that being said, I'd like to sincerely thank the two of you for coming to this meeting and doing this interview with me. And I hope everyone watches this because you guys said some really, really fantastic things. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting us. This was really nice to be a part of this.
Anytime.